My father kicked me out of the house for not wanting to abandon my career. But when the university awarded me $1 million scholarship, he begged for my forgiveness. I never thought I'd get to this point, writing about how my own life seems to have fallen apart in a matter of days. I guess I need to vent because honestly I don't know what else to do. I'm 19 years old and until just a few hours ago I lived with my father. My mom passed away when I was a little girl, and since then he has been my only close family, my only support figure, at least that's what I believed. For as long as I can remember, music has been my refuge, my passion, and honestly, what keeps me connected to the little childhood I remember. My mom gave me my first violin when I was 6 years old. I don't remember much about her, but that moment, the smile she had when I opened it for the first time, is etched in my memory as if it were yesterday. Learning to play was difficult at first, but with every melody I managed to draw from the instrument, I felt I was getting a little closer to her, as if music were our way of communicating even after she was gone. For years my father seemed to support me. He took me to classes, attended my recitals, even told me he was proud when I won some local competition. But everything changed when I started talking seriously about my future. I want to be a professional violinist, study music, dedicate my life to it. I've always known this, but for my father, that dream is worthless. He's always had this very clear vision of what I should do with my life. Study something practical, something that guarantees money, stability, and a real future. His list of options was the same that many parents seem to have etched in stone. Medicine, law, engineering. I tried to talk to him, explain that music is my future, that I can't imagine myself doing anything else, that it's not a passing whim. But every time I mentioned it, he closed himself off more, as if he wasn't even listening. Things started to get worse a few months ago. Every conversation about college ended in a fight. If I brought brochures from music programs, he'd throw them in the trash. If I tried to talk about auditions, he'd change the subject or simply leave the room. And little by little, the passive-aggressive comments turned into direct criticism. You're never going to make money with that. You think someone is going to pay you to play the violin? You're wasting your time. Last night, everything exploded. We'd been arguing for weeks. I told him that I'd already made my decision, that I wanted to enroll in a conservatory, that I'd already sent applications. He said I was being ungrateful, that I didn't understand everything he'd sacrificed for me. And then came the moment I'll never forget. He looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen before and said, "If you can't be the daughter I expected, then you have no place in my house." I stood in silence, stunned. For a moment I thought he wasn't serious, that it was just another tactic to make me change my mind. But then he gave me an hour to pack my things and leave. 1 hour. I packed some clothes, my laptop, a few personal belongings, and of course my violin into a backpack. I left everything else. I didn't have the time or energy to argue anymore. As I walked out the door, the only thing I heard was the sound of the lock turning behind me. I sat on the sidewalk in front of the house for hours. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I looked at my phone thinking about calling someone, but who? I have no other close family, and most of my friends are busy with their own lives. Finally, I called my best friend, Clara. I told her everything between sobs, and she and her mom came to get me. Now I'm staying on their couch, but I know I can't stay here forever. Clara and her family have been incredible. They've told me not to worry, to stay as long as I need, but I don't want to be a burden. I'm already looking for a job so I can save some money and maybe rent a room. But the idea of working full-time while trying to pursue my dream seems overwhelming. I can't stop thinking about everything that's happened, about how easy it was for my father to discard me as if I were nothing. How is it possible for a parent to do this to their child? I want to think that he's hurting, that maybe deep down he loves me. But how do you reconcile that with kicking me out of the house? On the one hand, I want to call him, apologize, tell him I'll study whatever he wants, that I'll do whatever it takes to go home. But on the other hand, I feel that if I do that, I'll be giving up everything I am, everything I've dreamed of. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move forward. All I have now is my violin, my dream, and the hope that somehow this isn't the end of my story. Update 1. 6 months have passed since that night I was forced to leave my father's house, and I feel like I've lived a decade in this short time. Sometimes I look back, and I can't believe everything that's changed, everything I've had to learn and endure to get here. When I stayed on Clara's couch, I promised myself I wouldn't give up. Of course, I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I knew that if I went back to my father, I would have to give up music, my dream, everything that made me feel alive. So with my violin in hand and a lot of fear in my heart, I started looking for a way to get ahead. The first few days were the hardest. I barely had any clothes and no source of income. Clara and her family helped me much more than I could ask for. Her mother insisted that I stay as long as I needed, but I knew I couldn't abuse her generosity. So after a few days I went out looking for work. It was humiliating at first. I had never had a formal job. My time had always been dedicated to school and music. In all the interviews they looked at me like I was a girl with no experience, and to be honest I was. But after weeks of rejections and endless walks, I finally got a position at a small coffee shop near the city center. The work was hard. I had to be on my feet for hours, dealing with grumpy customers and a boss who never missed an opportunity to remind me how replaceable I was. But it was money, and that's all that mattered. With my first paycheck, I bought some secondhand clothes and a good pair of work shoes. I also set aside a little to start paying my share of the expenses at Clara's house, even though her mom insisted it wasn't necessary. However, the hardest thing wasn't the job. The hardest thing was finding time to practice the violin. My schedule at the coffee shop was exhausting, and when I got home I just wanted to sleep. But I knew that if I stopped practicing, if I let fatigue win, I would be losing the only thing I had left. So every night after my shift, I locked myself in the small room Clara and I shared and played. It wasn't ideal. My fingers were stiff from exhaustion, and more than once I ended up crying in frustration because the notes didn't come out the way I wanted. But I didn't stop. It was as if every note I played was a small cry, a way to remind myself why I was doing all this. It was during those months that something unexpected happened. One night while I was practicing, Clara ran into the room with her phone in her hand. She had seen an ad on social media about a national classical music competition. The prize wasn't just an important recognition but also a significant amount of money. She looked at me and said, "You have to try." First I hesitated. How was I going to compete against musicians who probably had resources, time, and support? I could barely practice in my makeshift corner. But Clara wouldn't let me give up. She helped me record the audition video using her phone and a lamp as lighting. It was far from perfect, but I put my heart into every note. Weeks later, I received an email that changed everything. I had been selected as one of the finalists. I still remember how my hands were shaking as I read that message over and over again. It was my opportunity, and I wasn't going to waste it. The day of the competition arrived quickly. I didn't have money to buy a proper dress, so I wore one that Clara lent me. My violin, though old, was tuned and ready. I felt like an imposter among the other participants. But when I stepped onto the stage, something in me changed. I played as if my life depended on it because, in a way, it did. The rest of the night is a blur. I remember sitting in a corner of the auditorium, shaking, while the judges deliberated. And then they announced the winner, my name. For a moment I thought I had misheard. I had to stand up slowly, as if in a dream, and walk to the stage to receive my prize. Besides the money, which allowed me to pay my debts and save for the future, the contest brought something much more valuable. One of the judges, a professor from a prestigious university in another state, approached me after the event. He told me that my performance had impressed him, and that if I was interested I could audition for a full scholarship in his program. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That night, when I went home, I couldn't sleep. For the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, all this suffering had been worth it. I still don't know if I'm good enough for that university, but I'm determined to try. I have nothing to lose, and for the first time in months I feel like I have something to gain. Update 2. A year has passed. A year since my life changed radically. Since I made the decision to bet everything on my dream, no matter the cost. Sometimes I'm still surprised how much things can change in such a short time. For those who have been following my story, I want to tell you how I got here, because if you had told me a year ago that I would be writing these words, I would never have believed it. After winning the competition and receiving the offer to audition for the university, my life became a roller coaster of emotions, doubts, and effort. The first thing I did was put everything I had into preparing for that audition. I used part of the prize money to take some private lessons with a local teacher. It was expensive, but it was worth every penny. I felt like a sponge, absorbing every tip, Every correction, every detail. I knew this was my opportunity and I couldn't waste it. The audition was terrifying. I still remember how my hands were shaking as I held my violin. The auditorium was huge, much bigger than I was used to, and the judges seemed so serious, so impossible to impress. I had practiced my piece hundreds of times, but in that moment every note felt like a trial by fire. I closed my eyes and played. I played as if it were the last time I would do it, as if my life depended on those notes. When I finished, the silence in the room made me think I had failed. But then one of the judges nodded, and another smiled slightly. They thanked me and told me they would wait to give the results. That wait was one of the longest of my life. 2 weeks later I received the email. I had won the full scholarship. Not only would they cover my tuition but also housing, food, and materials. Literally, I wouldn't have to worry about anything but studying and improving. I read the email so many times that my phone almost ran out of battery. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. My father, who hadn't had any contact with me since the night he kicked me out of the house, suddenly reappeared. It all started when someone from my old town saw an article in the local newspaper about my victory in the competition and my scholarship. I don't know how he found out, but soon my name was on the lips of several people, and apparently someone told my father. One day I received a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was him. "I'm proud of you. We should talk and fix things," the message said. I froze, staring at it over and over again. How dare he say that after everything, after kicking me out of his house, after months without even trying to find out if I was okay? I decided not to respond. I wasn't ready to face him, and honestly I didn't know if I wanted to. Soon after, he started calling me. I never answered, but he left several voicemails. In them, his tone oscillated between pride and guilt. "I saw the article. I knew you always had talent. I'm glad you're achieving great things." Then, in another message, "I know I made mistakes. Maybe I was too hard on you, but I always wanted the best for you. Don't forget that I'm your father." It was as if the success that had cost me so much to achieve had brought him back, but not for the right reasons. For months I had fought alone, worked to exhaustion, and endured endless nights of doubt and fear. Now that things were finally improving, he wanted to jump on the bandwagon. While this was happening, I was preparing to move to college. It was a long and exhausting process, but also exciting. I left my job at the coffee shop and packed my things, which weren't many to be honest. The day I arrived on campus was one of the most exciting of my life. It was a beautiful place, full of talented students and inspiring professors. They gave me a room in a student residence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place I could call home. My classes started almost immediately, and the level of demand was like nothing I had ever experienced before. Every day I was surrounded by people who were incredibly talented, which made me feel both inspired and insecure. But I reminded myself that I wasn't there by luck. I had earned my place. Despite how busy my schedule was, I couldn't prevent my father's attempts at contact from continuing to haunt my mind. I knew that sooner or later I would have to decide what to do about that relationship, but every time I thought about everything that had happened, about how he had left me alone when I needed him most, I felt I couldn't forgive him. Meanwhile, something incredible happened. One of my professors, who also conducts a professional orchestra, offered me the opportunity to play with them as a soloist in a concert. It was an experience I'll never forget. That night, while I was on stage, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride in myself. Today I can say that I am living my dream, although it wasn't easy to get here. The relationship with my father is still pending, but I'm focused on my music and taking advantage of every opportunity that comes my way. I don't know what will happen in the future, but I know I'm not going to let anyone stop me. Update 3. Another year has passed, and my life continues to change in ways I never imagined possible. Sometimes I stop and think about how everything was 2 years ago: a scared girl, recently kicked out of her home, not knowing where to go or how to survive. It's as if that person were someone completely different now. I am in a place where I never thought I would be, although the path to get here has not been easy. Since the last time I wrote, my life at university has been a whirlwind. My days are filled with rehearsals, classes, and individual practices that consume practically all of my time. The competition here is fierce. Every student has a talent that seems out of this world, And at first I felt like I was out of place, as if at any moment someone would realize that I didn't deserve to be here. But I reminded myself again and again that I had earned this place. My effort, my sacrifice, and my love of music brought me here. And I wasn't going to waste that opportunity. Something I didn't expect was how exhausting it would be to live with that constant pressure. During the first semester, there were nights when I barely slept, not because of homework but because of my own mind. Every note I played, every mistake I made in rehearsals, stayed with me like a shadow, making me doubt myself. But at the same time, there was something profoundly liberating in knowing that I was dedicating my life to what I love. Every day when I took my violin and played, I felt that, despite everything, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. However, the real change came in the second semester when opportunities began to appear. My professor, who had always shown a special interest in me, recommended me for an audition in a professional orchestra. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that there were much more talented and experienced students than me. But he told me something I'll never forget. Talent brought you here, but your determination is what will take you further than anyone. That audition was one of the most intimidating moments of my life. I was competing against musicians who had already played with great orchestras and had years more experience than me. But somehow I did it. I was accepted as a guest violinist, and I had the opportunity to play in an important concert. It was the first time I played in front of such a large audience. And although I was terrified, I felt something indescribable. It was as if all the suffering and effort had been worth it. At that moment, while all this was happening, my father kept trying to contact me. I hadn't responded to any of his messages since the first time he wrote to me after reading about my scholarship, but it seemed like he wasn't willing to give up. He started contacting me in more insistent ways. Calls from unknown numbers, messages through acquaintances, and even emails. They all followed the same line. That he was proud of me, that he had made mistakes, that he wanted to fix things. The first time one of those emails arrived in my inbox, I read it. I just wanted to know what he had to say. In it, he half apologized. I know I was hard on you, but I did it because I wanted the best for you. Now that I see how far you've come, I realize that I had to let you grow on your own. Those words made my blood boil. It wasn't a real apology. It was a way to justify what he did. As if kicking me out of the house had been some kind of strategy to push me towards success. I wanted to answer him, but I didn't. Instead, I closed my computer and decided that he didn't deserve my time or energy. Things intensified a few months ago. One of my cousins, with whom I have sporadic contact, called me to tell me that my father was talking about me with his acquaintances, summarizing my achievements as if he had had something to do with them. Apparently, he carried a printed copy of the article about my scholarship and showed it to anyone who would listen. I imagined him sitting with his friends saying things like, "I knew my daughter would make it," or "I always supported her, even if she didn't see it." The irony was painful. For years he told me that music wasn't a real career, that I would never achieve anything with my violin, that I was wasting my life. And now, when I'm finally seeing the fruits of my effort, he wants to be part of my success. One day he even dared to leave me a voicemail asking me to visit him. His voice sounded almost desperate. He said he wanted us to be a family again, that it was time to leave the past behind. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Leave the past behind, of course, because it was convenient for him. At the same time, the biggest opportunity of my life appeared. I was invited to participate as a soloist in an international tour. The news came like a dream. It meant that I would play in cities like New York, Berlin, and Tokyo, in front of audiences that not even in my wildest dreams I imagined. When they told me I had been selected, I locked myself in my room and cried. I cried for the girl who slept on Clara's couch, who didn't know if she could make it to the next day. I cried for all the times I doubted myself, for all the moments when I thought I wouldn't be enough. My father wasn't there to see that moment, and he won't be here to see any of the ones to come. Update 4. 6 months have passed since the last time I wrote, and I feel that every day that goes by I am further from the person I was 2 years ago. This last half year has been a whirlwind of emotions, achievements, and difficult decisions, and I finally feel like I'm beginning to close some chapters of my life that I thought I could never leave behind. The international tour in which I participated as a soloist was literally the most transformative experience of my life. Every city I played in, every stage I set foot on, made me feel that all the pain, tears, and sacrifices were worth it. New York was the starting point, and the first night of the tour is still etched in my mind like a dream. I remember being backstage, looking at the lights illuminating the packed auditorium, and feeling that mix of adrenaline and nervousness that always appears before playing. When I finally stepped onto the stage and saw the audience, I knew that this was my place. Every note I played that night was a tribute to everything that had brought me there. The exhausting days working at the coffee shop, the nights practicing until dawn, the tears I shed in silence when no one else was watching. At the end of the concert, the ovation was deafening. I closed my eyes for a moment and absorbed every applause, not because I needed validation, but because it meant that I had survived, that I had reached the other side of the tunnel. The tour continued in Berlin, Tokyo, Paris, and other cities, each with its own magic. I met extraordinary musicians, people who became friends and mentors, and I learned more about music and myself in those months than in my entire previous life. It was also the first time I felt truly independent, not depending on anyone but my own strength and skills. However, not everything was easy. During the tour, my father reappeared more insistently than ever. Apparently, he had discovered that I was traveling and playing with an international orchestra, thanks to social media posts and online articles that talked about my success. He started sending more frequent messages, some of them almost pleading, others filled with a kind of manipulative nostalgia. One of the messages that impacted me the most said, "I'm going through a difficult time, and I would like you to come home, even if it's just to talk. I know I made mistakes, but I'm your father and I will always be proud of you." It was a mix of pleading and guilt that left a knot in my stomach. I knew that what he really wanted was to share in the fruits of my success, not to repair our relationship. Upon returning from the tour, I found several more messages. One of them said that he was facing serious economic problems. According to what I could understand from some comments from my cousin, my father had lost his job months ago and was about to lose the house I grew up in. He asked me for help, saying that family should always support each other, no matter what. That message was like a bucket of cold water. For months I had tried to ignore his presence, not to think about what had happened between us, but this new attempt at contact opened old wounds. Family should always support each other? Where was that idea of family when he kicked me out on the street without a penny? Where was it when I spent nights crying because I didn't know if I could go on? I spent days reflecting. I couldn't help but feel guilty, as if somehow I were responsible for his situation. But then I remembered something someone once told me. You don't have to carry the weight of other people's decisions, not even your parents'. My success, my stability, and my happiness shouldn't be a return ticket for someone who decided to abandon me when I needed him most. Finally, I made a decision. I wrote him a short but clear message. I hope you can find a way to get ahead, but I am no longer part of your life. You chose to leave me alone when I needed you most, and now I choose to move on without looking back. I wish you the best. Sending that message was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My finger was shaking over the send button, but once I did, I felt a relief I can't describe. It was as if a huge burden had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't my responsibility to save him or carry his regret. Since then I haven't heard from him again. Perhaps he finally understood that I wasn't going to allow him back into my life, or perhaps he simply gave up, realizing that he no longer had power over me. While all this was happening, I received other great news. I was invited to participate in a prestigious music festival in Vienna. It is one of the most important events in the world of classical music, and the fact that I was chosen is an honor that I am still trying to assimilate. It will be in a few months and I am dedicating all my time to preparing. Life isn't perfect, but for the first time I feel like I'm exactly where I should be. Every step I take takes me further from the pain of the past and closer to the life I always dreamed of. Final update. 2 years have passed since I first wrote here, feeling lost and broken, recently kicked out of my home by the man I thought would always be there to support me. If I could talk to that version of myself, to the 19-year-old girl who cried on the sidewalk of her house with a backpack and a violin, I would tell her that everything is going to be okay, no more than that, that everything is going to be amazing. Today I am writing this from a hotel in Paris, in a room with a direct view of the Eiffel Tower, just after giving a concert that I honestly have no words to describe. It was my debut as a soloist in one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world, in front of an audience of thousands of people, including important figures from the world of classical music. Every applause, every ovation was like a reminder of everything I have overcome to get here. In recent months, my life has reached a stability I never thought possible. After the festival in Vienna, which was another important milestone in my career, opportunities began to rain down. I was offered several contracts with international orchestras, and now I am working on my first solo album. In addition, I have begun to give master classes, something I always dreamed of, to give back a little of what music has given me. But I'm not here just to talk about my achievements, but also to close the most difficult chapter of my life. The relationship with my father, or rather, the lack of it. It's still a shadow that occasionally appears in my mind. A few weeks ago, while I was in the middle of rehearsals for this concert in Paris, I received an unexpected call. It was from one of my cousins, someone I keep in occasional contact with, but who doesn't usually call me without a reason. He told me that my father had tried to contact me again, this time through him. Apparently, his situation hadn't improved. He had definitely lost the house, was living with a friend, and his health was beginning to deteriorate due to stress in his lifestyle. What struck me most was what my cousin said afterwards. He keeps talking about you as if he were part of your life. He always tells people that his daughter, the famous violinist, is succeeding around the world, but I think deep down he knows that he no longer has the right to call you his daughter. Those words stayed with me for days. I thought about how for years my father tried to mold me according to his vision of success, only to reject me when I decided to take my own path. Now he wanted to hang on to the success I had achieved despite him, not thanks to him. I didn't contact him. I didn't respond to his attempts, nor did I return his call. And not because I still feel resentment, although if I'm honest, there's still a part of me that remembers the pain of that night he left me alone, but because I learned that not everyone deserves a place in your life, even if they are supposed to be there by default. The last time I played on stage, something changed inside me. During my last piece, I closed my eyes and let each note be a farewell, not only to my father, but also to all the doubts, fears, and feelings of inadequacy that I carried for so long. I felt that I was finally ready to let it all go. Today I am at peace. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. Everything I have achieved, I did with my own hands, my effort, and my love for music. Every concert, every contract, every recognition is a testament to my strength, and to the people who were truly there to support me, like Clara and her family, who never let me fall. Some might say that I should forgive my father, that I should lend him a hand in his time of need. But for me, forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. I forgive him in the sense that I no longer allow his abandonment to define or control my life, but that doesn't mean he has a place in it. My true revenge, if I can call it that, isn't an act of anger or resentment. It is this moment, this life that I have built. It's every note I play on stage, every step I take forward, every time I show that I didn't need his approval or his support to become who I am today. I close this chapter of my life with a smile and a heart full of gratitude for everything I have learned and overcome. Thanks to everyone who has read me, who has shared words of encouragement, and who has followed this story with me. Today I close this book. It's time to write a new one.